Welcome to the July 2024 Holts main sale. This room is filled with some of the best guns in the world, as always, as well as a few weird and wonderfuls. Today, we're going to look through them. Let's go. We're going to start with this today. It's a Luciano Bosis, which you will know by now is one of my favourite makers. They never make a gun that doesn't look good, but this one looks exceptional because it's engraved by one of the best engravers who ever lived, Galeazzi. This gun, which is lot 1663 of the July main sale 2024 here at Holts Auctioneers, is beautiful. It's an over and under 12 bore, weighing in at just over 8 pounds. It's got 27 3/4 inch barrels, no mid-rib, and a vented 9mm hand checkered top rib with a little wide bead sight at the front. It's fixed choke at 1/4 3/4 with 2 3/4 inch chambers. The stock is around 14.5 inches in a nicely figured piece of wood. What's interesting is the general shape of this shows you that it's got a deep cut for your thumb and a relatively high comb. And I'll tell you what, I'd find it infinitely shootable. It's nice to see a gun that's got a little bit of height in the comb. Is this a trap gun? Is it a duck gun? I don't really know. It's sort of a bit of a hybrid. I'd say more of a trap and sporting gun, a clay gun, than a bird gun. At the bottom of the grip you have a horn extension. It does feel really good in the hand. The profile isn't the most beautiful, perhaps, that's fair to say, but it feels good, and that counts for a lot. Moving on swiftly from both the barrels and the stock, because they're not the most exciting part of this gun, the action is. This gun is a side-plated action with a detachable trigger group. There's a very small button here, and in fact, all of the working parts of a Bosis are super fine. Just winding forward to the fore-end here, firstly you've got that little cruciform fore-end tip, but the button to release the fore-end, it's got about maybe a millimetre of movement, millimetre and a half movement to get that detached, and it's the same for the trigger unit. It's a very small button on the back there. You press that in with your thumb and pull with your left hand and the trigger unit comes out. And it's a very nicely finished thing. No dramas there. A few wear marks, a few scratches are putting it in and out, but this is now a 30-odd-year-old gun, so you're not looking for it to be particularly mint. The trigger unit does sit a little proud of the action, and I'm not entirely sure why that is, but it does, and it's about the only thing I can find on this gun that I'm not a huge fan of, is the fit of that trigger guard. What we're really interested in here is the action. This is engraved by Angelo Galeazzi, who lived from 1930 to 2012 and is one of the most renowned engravers of all time. This guy pioneered the use of Bellino. Bellino is engraving that is just done with a burin engraver. Basically just a stick in your hand, you just pick away at the metal bit by bit, not the hammer and chisel that perhaps is more known in engraving. Bellino is my favourite type of engraving. It allows such creativity. The harder you push, the deeper it cuts, the harsher the cut looks, the finer you cut, the flatter it looks. You can really create depth in a scene, and Galeazzi is known for that. The scenes on this gun are stunning. You have a bunch of mallard coming in on one side and a bunch of Canada geese coming in on the other. It's as close to perfect engraving as I can imagine. You have this fine scroll overlaid with large acanthus. You have all of the pieces of metal tied together with beautiful border work. On the base of the action you have a dog retrieving a bird with a pile of teal he's already retrieved. It's just lovely. All of the backgrounds tie in and flow together and just give this gun a really nice artistic feel. The final touches on that trigger guard, you have a wildfowl up to his waist in water shooting at a skein of geese, flock of ducks, something. But you even have ducks in the background, ducks in the foreground, one falling to the shot. It's as perfect a looking gun as you can imagine. This gun sits at 7,000 to 9,000, which I don't actually think is bad at all. It's not perhaps the most conventional of stock shapes or setups, but I don't think that matters particularly because you're not going to care too much about how you shoot it or in fact the specs of it when you sit and look at the beauty of this action every day. To own a bit of Galeazzi's work is rare. To own one to this standard is super rare. These things don't come up too often, and the privilege to hold one and look at it and share it with you guys is off the chain. Alright, enough of beautiful guns, let's move on to something a little bit more obtuse, shall we? You all know I have a soft spot for UGB 25XLs, and this is one of those. It is the break open 2-shot semi-automatic that Beretta produced for a few years, a decade and a half ago. We made a film on it called Beretta's Biggest Mistake, or maybe we should have called that Beretta's Bravest Choice. Those who are not in the know, firstly go and watch that film, but the succinct version is, they were not the best design in the world. They had some reliability issues, and as such gained a bit of a reputation, firstly for being a bit expensive, a bit pointless, and a bit unreliable. However, those who have shot them and used them, the working ones, know that these guns shoot like merry hell. They are a fantastic, fantastic gun. A lot of that is to do with the weight. This gun is 8 pound 6. You then marry that up with the fact it's a semi-automatic, it is almost recoilless. Then you imagine that most of that weight is sat nicely in the center of this gun, allows you a heavy gun that is very nice to handle. Smooth enough, fast enough, extremely versatile. And those who own these guns and shoot these guns, well, not many people have anything bad to say about the way they shoot, and those who own them and shoot them rave. Rave is a good word for what owners do. This gun has a standard Beretta stock, 14.5 inches, the interchangeable pad system at the back, and this weird laser cut reverse checkering. It's definitely of the era, and well, it's not the most practical thing in the world, but the chances of you sort of needing huge amounts of grip whilst clay shooting are minimal, right? The gun opens with this lever on the left. You push down with your thumb like that, and the gun opens up. You put one cartridge in the chamber, close the gun, and then you put one cartridge in the carrier on the side. When you shoot, the empty flies out the bottom, it picks up the second shell and reloads it. It's a pretty simple system. You have a very large beaver tail forend, again, quite nice, not so deep. Because there's no gas system or magazine tube in the front, it allows a very low profile of receiver. That, again, low center of gravity is something that generally makes guns handle well. Lot 1597 is in for £1,200 to £1,600, which isn't bad money for one of these. When they stopped being produced, they took a dip in value, but very quickly, when the unreliable ones are off the market and people realize this is a good gun and we want it, the second-hand ones on the market spiked. And generally speaking, you're in for £2,500 for one of these now, which is a lot of money, but it's not a lot if you want one. This makes this at £1,200 to £1,600, plus the 30% or 25% commission plus VAT. Not a terrible buy. Now the downside of the UGB 25XL, as I have said, is the lack of reliability, and as such, it's kind of a buyer beware situation. If you're going to buy into one of these, beware that may not be the most reliable choice for life. Also beware that it was only made for a limited amount of time, and so there is only a limited amount of spares in existence. That said, I would have thought that most of the unreliable ones were taken off the market by this point, and that everything left, including this one, are the good ones. Either way, it's a rare opportunity to pick one of these up. When they do come up, they generally go quick. I'm going to be interested to see what this goes for. Often look at Holts sale, and it gives you a good indicator of what people are willing to pay for stuff outside of just a price tag on a shelf. I feel like this one could go relatively big, depending on who's after it. Or, depending on how sane people are feeling, maybe it won't. You never know. But it's going to be interesting to see what this goes for either way. There's a great deal of small bores here at this sale. A lot of 410s, some nice 28s and some nice 20s. I've picked out a few I want to share with you, starting with this, the 28 gauge. Lot 1456 is a gun made by a maker you rarely see in England, and that is Schiace Boniotti. It's a side-by-side 12 bore weighing 7 pound 2 that was made in 1984. The thing that stood out to me was the engraving, and this auction, to be fair, has some of the best engraving we've seen in a while. I'm aware that engraving doesn't make a gun shoot any better or make it be built any better, and there is some cases over history of people just, over-adorning guns that were not worth the engraver's time, but this is not one of them. I think this is stunning. It's a little different to what we just saw in terms of its coverage, and there's a simplicity to the design here. If you have a look at these lock plates, they appear relatively simple until you spend a bit more time looking at them. They're perhaps less loud and less obvious and less artistic in terms of coverage than the last gun we saw, but actually these are fully engraved in Bellino style once again. And as I said, the beauty of Bellino is you can go as light or as hard as you want, and you can see just these light touches in the back to represent clouds and depths rather than these birds being just on a plain background. And that is in itself kind of beautiful, right? Because I think without this they'd stand out a little much, but you don't really pay attention to the background. It's all about the completeness of the image. This is engraved by Terzi and is a fantastic job once again. Anyone who's spent any amount of time around wildlife or water or ducks will just appreciate how this flows, how the reeds pop out the water and you've got the little disturbance in the water around it, the reflection of the goose in the water. Even the wing beats, the way the feathers are folded back. There's a perfection in this kind of top-end engraving that really represents the master engravers are an understanding of that environment. I like art, and occasionally you'll see artists step outside their comfort zone to something they haven't studied quite so much. And it does seemingly occasionally lack those finer details that you may see in their more typical work. This is beautiful. On the offside here you have an English partridge, Hungarian partridge, depending where you are in the world, being followed by a point over a grassy bank, and on the bottom you have a pair of mallard duck flying again over some bulrushes. Whereas on the bosun that Bellino was put next to fine scroll and acanthus, this is put next to fine scroll with little rose bouquets. It's a different kind of look, a little bit more classy potentially, a bit more classic more than classy. But I love it, I really do. You have a rolled trigger guard with CB inlaid in gold and gold wire work around the breech ends of these chop blunt barrels. The 27 3/4 inch barrels have 2 3/4 inch chambers and are choked 3/4 and full. That's quite potent. You have a raised rib, file cut by hand once again, and a little white bead sight in the front. Overall, I think this is just a good looking gun. It's clearly a well-made thing. It's 40 years old, hasn't seen much use, and is just nice. I know it's silly to sort of get overly in love with the way a gun is engraved, but it's not, is it? It's kind of why we like guns. There's always something that can endear you to them, and in this case there is a lot that endears me to it. Lot 1503 jumped out at me because you don't see many side-by-side 28 gauges with both long barrels and long stocks, and this one has both. 30 inch barrels, 15 3/4 inch stock. It is a Griffin & Howe built gun. Well, it's built for Griffin & Howe by Arrieta in Spain, so it's an Arrieta with Griffin & Howe written on it, to Griffin & Howe's spec, and a very nice spec it is indeed. In reality, it's not that much of an exciting gun, but it has some nice little features and is just one of those good, honest workhorse things that don't come up often. It's in for 3,000 to 5,000, which is a significant saving on new and is clearly very little used. Built in 2011, so it is of a very modern era and, well, done to that modern standard. We've discussed Spanish gun making in the past, and nowadays, certainly over the last 25 years, everything they do has been done to an exceptional standard because they were producing stuff to a higher price point and a more premium market who demanded it. Back in the day, you'll see less than ideal things. This gun is hard to find fault in. 30-inch barrels, choked cylinder and improved cylinder with a raised file cut rib. I love it, like very much my cup of tea. Would have been nice in 31 or 32 inch, but you can't get too fussy with that kind of thing. The lack of choke may be disturbing to some, but if you've shot a 28 gauge with the right loads, in reality you're only shooting at stuff 35 yards. And so you don't need a great deal of choke. It's about putting the pellets onto the bird/target. The barrels weigh in at 1,148 grams and the gun weighs 6.9 pounds. Overall, not that lightweight, but when you consider you've got half a tree on the back, it's not so bad. The wood is oil finished, straight hand with an engraved oval JB. Black trigger guard, case colour hardened action with Griffin & Howe, New York, New York. We're going to stop for a second and talk about this action because Owen, who's filming this currently, asked, what is that? And it's an interesting thing because this is case colour hardened, but it's not bone and charcoal case colour hardening. It is done in arsenic, as many Spanish guns are. So, let me catch my breath, drink some coffee, and let's look over this action. So this is Spanish case colour hardening, and this is a English case colour hardening. This has been renewed in the modern era. Generally, over time, this will age and become softer and, well, look like an old gun. But mostly, if I showed you one of those, it would look pretty pale by comparison, so this is what a redone one looks like of a similar era to this. Before we go into the details of how both of these processes work, it's worth mentioning that case colour hardening's origins are when they were trying to harden steel. What they would have is the action steel, which potentially would be low carbon. To end up with a hard outer surface, they'd take the relatively cheap steel, put it in a bucket of high carbon charcoal, heat it up, and then dunk it into a bucket of water. And what that would do is take a very thin layer of this steel, would take on the carbon from the high carbon charcoal, and as it was dunked into water, it would stay in the top layer, producing a very hard surface on an otherwise softer piece of metal. I think that's a mass simplification, but there you go, that's why we're here. That process obviously now is vaguely obsolete. To actually harden metal correctly, in the modern era at least, firstly we're using super high quality steel by comparison to what they were using 150 years ago, but more importantly, when we harden something, it is done in a different way. Because that process can lead to warping, can lead to some issues, and is fairly inconsistent. In fact, if you look at the colour pattern here, if it was consistent carbon taken on into the surface of this metal, it would be a consistent colour, wouldn't it? What's interesting is what you're left with is a very beautiful look, and something that still fascinates gun owners to this day. As much as it fascinates us, it also polarizes us. So you'll find guns that have the case hardening, and then you'll find some that are bright finished. They'll have that colour taken off, but that still doesn't remove the carbon. It's just polished, essentially, whilst then retaining the hardness and all the qualities they were looking for by doing it. Modern hardening doesn't work like that. However, we still want to see that look. And so people still case harden guns, even though it is potentially suboptimal to do that. In reality, it's not that suboptimal. Some of those guns that were made during this time with this process, oh, they're still here, right? So it clearly worked. What is interesting is that this original method was kind of lost to the sands of time. That bone and leather charcoal mix, there's plenty of rumours of grave diggers going out because human bones worked best and all this kind of thing, and then you had to have the water at the right temperature, and it's a lot of that science that would have been passed down from maker to maker, and those secrets never been written down or taken outside of that building, were just lost as we moved on into new eras of how to do things. The Spanish looked at this because this is the look that they wanted, and they realised, firstly, it takes a lot of time, it's very difficult to get absolutely bang on, and it's a pretty laborious process. In an effort to get the same look and potentially do it quicker with less inconsistency, they opted for a different method to get a similar look. And if you actually look at these closely, you'll see that the colours and patination on this one is very different to this one. Although to the untrained eye, they're both kind of blue with some golds and a couple of purples, and it ends up with the same colour palette. The look is very different. That is because the Spanish opted for like a process by dipping the metal into an arsenic compound and then pulling it out and dunking it thereafter. You can get one of these done in hours for the traditional method, and you can get one of these done with the arsenic method in minutes. And to most people, they look the same. The purpose, of course, comes from the origins of gunmaking. Like a lot of things that we like about guns, they date back a long way from the time when guns were being developed into the modern shapes that we like now. Case colour hardening is cool. I mean, I case colour hardened my Maruku years ago because I like it. It's a good traditional look. The reality is it adds pretty much nothing to the gun technically nowadays other than look. And if you're going for a proper old English gun, it adds some of that gun making magic. As I said, there are very few people in the world who can still case colour harden with proper old fashioned leather and bone charcoal mixes because it's incredibly hard to do well. There's plenty of people who can do it, but to do it to the perfect standard there's a huge amount of trial and error and actually rediscovering those lost old ways. Alternatively, you can just dip a piece of metal in some arsenic compound and end up with something that's close, which is why the Spanish do that. And it still looks old-timey and cool and still ends up with a good hard finish. So who's to say that it's wrong? Not me, it's just less traditional. That said, this has been going on for so long now that maybe this counts as traditional. And it's one of those arts that probably will get lost one day when those chemicals get banned along with all the other good carcinogenic stuff that we use in the world. Either way, kind of fascinating, bit of a tangent. This is a beautiful 28 gauge. Let me know in the comments, right? Because I love case color hardening, but I also like a bright finish gun. Again, it's all about having the right finish on the right gun. Can you see a difference? Does it bother you? Do you think that refinishing case color hardening is silly, or should everything have its original color, however worn and grey? I am a fan of like 100-year-old case color hardening when you can just make out some of the blotchiness and a couple of the original colours, but it's mostly gone to that sort of hard grey colour. It's interesting, and like I said, the science of proper case color hardening isn't lost. There's a lot of people refining it and a few specialists doing it very, very well. I do love a lot of the old rumours and stories about, you know, you've got to use a 13-year-old girl's bones to make the best case color hardening. That kind of stuff that you see on forums is quite interesting, but there is apparently some truth to it. That back in the day, not 13-year-old girls' bones, but there is some truth to the grave robbing and all of those things to get the perfect colour, and that's how some of these people really managed to fine-tune their case hardening. And if you do look at different household styles of case colour hardening, you will see slight variations, and it's kind of exciting. Again, most of those old guns are now so worn, but when you see them retaining a lot of that original colour, you can see slight variances, whether that's in the steel they used or in the way that the case color hardening process they did worked. I don't know, but it is interesting. What I did learn is that if you try and case color harden a Maruku, that produces a different color once again. And so it's an infinitely variable process of the mixture of charcoals that you use, the temperature you cook it at, the water you put in, and the steel the gun is made of, all mixed with the variable. Then there's even more variables than that. The oxygen level in the water, I'm led to believe, is important too. It's fascinating. Let's move on before I continue down this rabbit hole. Very often in the main sale, there appears guns in the rack that yet I thought would probably be in the sealed bid. I'm talking about guns with no names, guns at very low value, and often they are the ones you should look at because there is a reason they are in here, and this lot 1704 is one of those. It's in at £300 to £500. It's got no maker's name on it. Nobody was proud enough to put a name on it, as they say. Made in Germany in 1920, and it's just a box lock. But there's a reason it's in here, and that is because it's a really nice box lock. Starting at the back, let's have a look over this thing. You have an oil finish stock in relatively nice wood. Nothing to write home about, but often the best guns of all time didn't have the most exotic wood. That's a fairly recent phenomenon that people will go for looks over potential quality when it comes to stocking. You have a raised cheek piece. It's a proper Germanic thing, right? And we've made an entire documentary film on German guns, and the history of these things is equally as fascinating as British guns. You have an unengraved oval in the bottom, horn grip cap, horn butt plate, and it does have a pistol grip rather than a straight hand stock. It's not massive, but is holdable and shootable. Being German of the 1920s, it has a horn trigger guard. That's cool. I mean, I appreciate obviously steel trigger guards, and they are a beautiful thing in their own right, but the mixing of an extra material into the gun making process is cool. You'll see horn butt plates on British guns with some regularity and occasionally horn grip caps, but a horn trigger guard is a very German thing, and I think it's really nice. Again, it took me a little bit of exposure to get used to German gun making, or at least start to appreciate it in any sense, and it's this place that really founded that love and interest. The teardrops, or the drop points on the back of these flats on the side, are kind of fascinating as well. Again, not British style, elongated, thin, beautiful, subtle. Big fan of that. You have a manual safety catch, which is quite interesting. Whether that is a design feature that's been taken out, well, you'd have to buy it to find out, which is only going to cost you £300 to £500, so it's almost worth it just to find out. Moving up into the action, you have carved serpentine fences with side clips. Side clips being these little pieces of metal that jut out over the side of the barrel there. I love the way that it flows. I love the deep carving over the top there. Again, very dramatic. You're not going to see that very often on English guns, and when you do, it's a bit of a treat. I like the way this goes. Obviously, we're not talking world-class engraving here. It's a little bit simplistic and not done to the highest of standards, but the price point doesn't dictate that it should be anything other. But what it is done to a great standard, and the whole thing kind of works together in its simplicity. Around the top here shows you it's got a treble grip action, and you have cocking indicators either side there. Engraving-wise, you have little game scenes of a duck and rabbits with a canthus and shaded background everywhere else, with a group of partridges on the floor plate. The barrels are 28-inch nitro reproved, having been sleeved in 1980. Raised rib, slight machine cutting on there. It's a nice thing, right? If you're going to have a side-by-side, there's lots of things you could do if you had sub £1,000, and hell, there's a lot of choices to make. But given that most people will be buying a side-by-side not for their main gun, there is plenty who do, of course, but there are most, I would say, people who buy a side-by-side do have it accompanied by something else. So you might as well have something interesting. Being German, it's very likely to be in good working order inside, at least a good working quality. It's a box lock, right, so there's not that much you can go wrong. Why not have something that's a little bit different and a little bit interesting? For sure, it's going to raise some eyebrows with those who perhaps don't appreciate and understand German gun making and design, but, you know, depending on your character, you may quite like that controversy. As I said, this gun was made in 1920 in Germany. If you think that's a couple of years after World War I, Germany was in an interesting place. So to have a little piece of that era and that history right here is cool. Where it was sleeved, it may well have had a maker's name, but apparently with German guns, you more often see guns without a name on. And I do wonder whether that was a culture thing, right? Perhaps the brand and the maker of the gun was appreciated by, let's say, a coding system or something, but it wasn't the done thing to have the name slathered all over it. Maybe marketing and fashion was different. I don't know. But either way, it's just an interesting difference. And part of appreciating global gun making and the differences between different countries' gun making history is those little nuances. Either way, I'm glad this is in the main sale. If this was in the sealed bid, it would just get lost, and it's just too nice to be lost. Simon, as always, I said, what are your favourites? And we have a table of 3 guns in front of us.
Yeah, I've picked out 3 that appeal to me for various different reasons. None of them have an estimate over £1,000. So we'll have a look
Attainable stuff.
3. Yeah. No, it is. It's very attainable stuff. The first one is a 16-bore box lock non-ejector, but it has touches of real class about it. There is something about this gun that is just beautifully put together, beautifully made. Little idiosyncrasies, which I find just make the whole thing more than the sum of its parts, let's put it that way.
For me, the thing that stands out most is the length, or perceived length, of that action.
Yeah, it's long, it's slender, it's got 30-inch Damascus barrels, really nice, fine quality Damascus barrels. Doll's head extension, and it's just beautifully put together, and it handles beautifully as well. It's not been over-finished, it's not been got at, it's just a beautiful box lock, which would be perfect for a walked up day.
Is 16-bore in any way still relevant? I know you're a big fan, and the 16-bore fans always say that it's the best and it's forever and blah, blah, blah. Is that any of that actually true? Can you justify any of that?
So there are some myths about 16-bore, that the ammunition is difficult to get and very expensive, neither of which are true. And most gun shops worth their salt stocking a range of cartridges will stock a 16-bore.
We'll have some, yeah.
A good quality, a 16-bore game cartridge is actually cheaper than the best quality 12-bore games cartridges. And if you're trying to economise on game cartridges, that's probably a mistake. Buy the best cartridge you can and shoot as accurately as you can with it.
Yeah, given the price and limited opportunity to pull the trigger at these things, good quality ammo is a worthy investment.
Exactly. And a 16 is a lovely cartridge to shoot. It has never been popular in the UK.
In the last 120 years.
It was regarded as the German caliber and deeply out of fashion between the wars because of it. But it is a highly, highly capable round in the right hands, as all cartridges are, of course. But who knows? In the future world of non-lead shot, perhaps 16 will have a resurgence over the 20 bore because it's just a little bit of a larger payload. So
it's just a bit close to 12.
Yeah, I can see. Yes, but it probably deserves a bit of a resurgence. But it is a very nicely put together gun. Little touches of real class. The engraving on the front slope of that safety catch.
Oh, that's lovely.
Is beautiful.
Is that a cannabis leaf?
I don't think so.
No, not so popular at the time. Maybe a horse chestnut.
It's just a lovely thing. The engraving around the finial, on the round part of the finial, is mirrored on the floor plate screw. And it's just things like that where you can see a good deal of thought has gone in to the design of the engraving and the execution of it, and it is lovely. £300 to £500.
Not 16-15. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not
15-15.
15-15.
Yeah, but it's not a lot for a really, really good quality gun. Next, caught my eye as I was walking around the room. I didn't see it in the catalogue, but I'm having a look at it now. And again, talking of deeply unfashionable, Charles Hellis is not a fashionable name, not a fashionable maker.
Not a name worth much attention, generally speaking. Great guns, but it's not sort of, there's no hype, no marketing, no excitement.
No. Part of that is because he specialised in 26-inch barrel guns, shorter barrel guns, and they are beautifully made. And this one is a cracking example, and anybody who looks at Holt's Instagram page will know that I'm a sucker for a carved fence. That is a properly carved fence. We've actually split these two because they were a composed pair.
Okay.
So they're about, I think one's 1926, one's 1932. So that's 1461, and that's £700 to £900 for just understated elegance.
Just kind of the point in a side-by-side most of the time anyway is not to be too loud.
Yes.
It's very nice.
It's beautifully done.
Plenty of original colour as well, which is
that does
real
help.
nice. We spoke about that earlier.
And you can't recreate that, really, these days. People try, and it just doesn't look right.
Yeah, we need more 13-year-old girl bones. That's what you need.
Is that what,
yeah,
is that what we need?
Yeah.
Okay, for the fairness.
Preferably dead for about 3 decades before you dig them up.
Okay.
Yeah, let the worms work the magic.
Okay.
No? Okay.
That's the old recipe, isn't it?
Yeah, apparently so.
So, moving on to one of my favourite guns in the room. This is a classic example of, I think, a gun that deserves some restoration and some money being thrown at it. I think we focus too much on trying to buy the best example of everything and ignore the stuff that has a little bit of work to be done. And I think that's a mistake. I think it's we were discussing earlier. People do it in cars. They restore cars.
Yeah, people think nothing of throwing money into a car and for the enjoyment of the process and having something unique to themselves.
Yeah.
It's extremely rare with guns because it's a bad investment.
It is a bad look,
but it's a worse investment to buy a car and do it up.
Exactly. Yeah. This isn't about investing your money and then trying to make a profit at the end of it. This is about getting a beautiful old gun back into health and being able to treasure the product at the end of it. So this is a Bonehill 17.
To quote you, by the way, there's you're only in original condition once.
But there is that. This is a tricky conundrum. This Bonehill has had a bit of a hard life. But underneath here, again, are some real touches of quality. You've got teardrops are bone or horn insert for the teardrops. You've got recessed checkered side panels that have little nodes in them as well. You've got, again, a fluting fence going up there. You can see the stocker has put a little fluted lip to the back of the pistol grip, to the rear of the semi-pistol grip.
Isn't it?
There's no reason for that to be there other than the stocker going, this is what I can do.
Yeah.
And this is how skilled I am.
Right way of doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
it
occasionally
just
see
runs
that
with the checkering so well.
it flows. The lines just flow down, and it's a really lovely old gun in need of someone's passion.
All right, talk me through, firstly, how much is this lot, and then how much would it cost to get it from A to B?
Well, this is £700 to £900 as it stands.
Okay. So let's say you're in for £1,200–1,300 to buy the gun.
Yeah.
Okay.
It needs, in my opinion, it could do with a reblack of the barrels, and retail-wise, to the private customer rather than the trade rate, you tell me what a reblack for retail would be.
£250 to £300.
There you go. So that's not a huge amount to throw.
You can get it done a lot cheaper, but we're talking for stuff you'd actually be proud to get back.
There's varying degrees of reblacking. You can have average reblacking for a discount price, or you can have best quality blacking.
And that's another price level. Again.
It is.
That £300 mark, you're going to look at it and go, that's good.
You're going to get a quality finish. And that depth of colour on the barrels will set off the remaining colour on the action. Don't be tempted to polish actions. Please don't strip, polish, or otherwise shine an action, because you cannot put that back. Reblacking, yes, it does make it sing out, and I think it really would benefit this gun, because you can see the engraving to the breech ends here as well is extra long.
Would you consider ever having that engraving repicked if you're having it reblacked?
Personally, no. I wouldn't. I would leave as is, because if you look at repicked breech end engraving, the carved versions of those breech end engraved guns, they look better when they are sharper in relief. These are deliberately not quite so deep in relief.
Yeah, it's not
and
it's supposed to flow from
Exactly.
the barrels into the action,
It's not supposed
be
to jump
too
out.
hard.
It's
Okay.
not supposed to jump out at you, so I would leave it as is. It has had the stock refinish, but not to a gleaming London best oil finish. I wanted to see...
Sympathetic restoration.
It's exactly that. I wanted to see some slight history left. So this could do with some of these marks and dents being knocked out to allow this colour and this figuring that is inherent there
Put a
to come
decent
out.
finish back on the wood.
Exactly.
Fill the pores. Make it gleam a bit.
Yes, and also there's a gouge out the stock here, just on the edge there, which is a shame.
Leave that in the grand scheme of things rather than stick another piece on.
But again, signs of quality. Those heel and toe plates are
they're beautiful,
gorgeous.
aren't they?
For under £1,000, factor in some money to restore it, and it would come back to life.
Tight on the action?
It's not too bad, I seem to remember. This is actually sound.
Nice.
There's a tiny bit of play there, but not much. Worthy of some effort.
Worthy of work.
I reckon. Yeah, really,
And I mean,
really
a
lovely thing.
reblack and a service, 500 quid and you've got a gun ready to go.
Exactly.
Refinish the stock to a decent standard.
To a decent standard. Doesn't have to be depth of best London finish.
It's beautiful. I mean, those two are this is lovely in its own way.
Yeah.
But this is next level.
You see presentation guns given as gifts in the
Yeah.
20s and the turn of and the 1900 to 1910.
I'm waiting
that
for
sort of
someone
thing.
to give me a presentation.
Yeah, that would be
gun
nice,
from
wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And they have these kind of touches to them with heel and toe plates and extra bits here, there, everywhere. Quality bits applied to it by various different skilled tradesmen and gun makers.
And providing you're not that bothered, there is a scuff here, a bit there. It's character.
It is, yeah.
I
You don't want to completely refinish the character off the gun. As you said, it's sympathetic restoration is the way forward.
Awesome. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Lot 1604 here is a Beretta 686. On the face of it, pretty unexotic, right? It's no real reason for it to be in here from the outside. However, if I told you that this gun is the property of, or soon to be former property of, 1992 Formula One champion Nigel Mansell, the mustachioed legend himself, how cool is that? I appreciate that in the grand scheme of things, it was just his gun. But there's a lot of things in here with provenance from famous people from across history and time, and lords and ladies and really influential people. And yet none of them I seem to care about as much as a Formula One world champion. I'm a big Formula One fan. I like the fact that you could own a little piece of Nigel Mansell's life. On top of that, you get a signed copy of his book, signed and personalised copy of his book if you buy one of his guns from this auction. There is this, there is some cheaper, I think this is like £400 to £600, and you have something like this, which is a little bit more special. Lot 1385 is a pair of Holland Royals made for Nigel Mansell. These are at a slightly different price point. You know, these are sitting at 30 to 50 grand, which is perhaps more of a stretch for most of us than a 686. But they are a lovely pair of guns. They're in fantastic, fantastic order. He's clearly looked after them a great deal. And they're Phil Coggan engraved beautifully with all of Nigel's working dogs. Like, it's a cool looking gun. And again, a proper bit of like history, but really relatable history. I obviously wasn't old enough to appreciate Formula One when he won the world champion, but I am completely aware of his existence, having watched many older races, having watched him on television over the years, having watched his waxwork in the back of the Grand Tour cars. It just is such an amazing thing to see this here, and I guess this is one of the first times I've seen a gun that belonged to someone who I actually felt some connection to. His ownership aside, they're a very solid pair of guns. I like that a lot. Anyway, back to more affordable stuff. This is a Browning Custom V25 and this is a Giulio Bernardelli, and we're going to start by looking over this Browning. It's a custom gun done in the Windsor Ore style, 15.5-inch highly figured stock, and what's kind of interesting is that on any other caliber gun this stock would potentially be a little inappropriate, but given the complete lack of recoil you get through a 410, I'd say you can get away with as much figuring through the headwork as you like. The engraving itself is one of my favourite patterns. I mean, look at it, that big sort of decorative acanthus with the little game scenes, the gold. I like gold, but not too much gold. This is lovely. The little centres to the flowers, the tiny touch on the border, This is a beautifully adorned gun, just loud enough to be classy, but not too loud that it's completely tasteless. The engraving of the game birds is lovely, again stylized. They're not known particularly for having Bellino on their guns, so this is a little bit more of the type or that you'd expect. 26.5-inch barrels is standard of the era for a 410 and still fairly standard now, unfortunately. But in reality, there's not that much weight out the front, even with a 32-inch, that you're going to change a lot. I've shot some of the 26.5-inch 410 B25s, or a single B25 in 410 with 26.5-inch barrels with this same raised rib, and I tell you what, I didn't feel like it was a super short-barreled gun, which is good, I suppose. What I love about high-end Brownings often is the way that this action is carved around the top here. It just flows beautifully into the breech of the barrels, and I know that sort of little fold is completely pointless, but it does look beautiful. It's a 3-piece forend. Those who know Brownings will appreciate that on the B25 grade guns, the forend and the barrels come as one piece, generally speaking, the theory being that humans have 2 hands, so why make a gun in 3 pieces? But on this, the 3-piece forend, the forend is cut into 3 pieces and still attached. So when you take the action off of the barrels, it looks like that. Then when it comes to storage, you just push that tab up, push this back. Wow, this gun is tight as you like. It looks like any other gun with a forend attached. But the attached forend's a nice move. It is nice. And the 3-piece forend, given that it's designed to look completely seamless, I mean, it's just beautiful gun-makey stuff. And as we've already said, that's often the pointless things that are the most exciting to us, sort of lovers of guns. Ruthless efficiency isn't that sexy. It's what you want, obviously, when you want to put in high scores or shoot big birds and you're really looking for the more practical aspect. But life is too short to just be purely practical and pragmatic all the time. Why a 3-piece forend? I guess the real answer is why not? It's pretty. We've got partridge on one side, woodcock on the bottom, and pheasants on the offside. And I kind of like these Art Deco pheasants, to be fair. I am learning to appreciate different styles of engraving more. I think certainly when I first started learning about guns and becoming as involved as I am currently, it was years ago now I suppose, I remember looking at stuff and just going, ugh. And a bit like that German gun we looked at earlier, often you need to look at something and actually understand why it looks like it looks to appreciate it, like any form of art. Before we finish on this gun, price-wise it is a bit more expensive, it's 7 to 9 grand, but for this grade of gun, for the engraving, for the look, and for the rarity of it, that's kind of an acceptable price tag. But before we leave, the most important and exciting part, the partridge top lever. Check that out. It's actually a different bird on both sides, which is a lovely touch. Again, it's that kind of subtlety that I love in a gun. It's not that subtle, but that attention to detail, those little custom things go a long way. Before we finish up, let me just go over this wood quickly. No doubt, this is a beautiful piece of wood. There is nothing about this that would not be stunning. However, when looking at wood, oh, by the way, check out those drop points. That is stunning. The scallop drop points slightly offset down to the bottom. I like that. When picking a piece of wood for a gun, and I mentioned this earlier, and I've clearly got a bee in my bonnet about it, seeing as I'm referencing it again. Most of the best guns ever made have plainer wood. You can look around this wood and pick many of the finest gun makers in the world, and most of them will have relatively straight, relatively unexciting woodwork. And that is because that is the strongest. Not only is it the strongest, generally speaking, if it's that consistent, the shrinkage and deformation over time will be similar across the grain of guns. You're looking at a much longer lifespan without it looking weird, shrinking on the left, warping to the right. But secondly, the recoil and the way it handles recoil will vary massively. Straight grain handles recoil the best. Like you need a medium density, so sort of something like a grade 1 where there isn't much grain to the stock will not handle the recoil in the same way. And we're talking minuscule things here, of course, but there's so much more to picking the right stock and looking for the perfect piece of wood than just it looks pretty. More importantly, when we actually look at this stock, you'll see sap hole that's been filled with a little piece of wood, another bit of filler that runs up round here, and another piece here and here. Again, in a 410 this doesn't matter. We're not talking about handling recoil, we're not talking about Olympic grade shooting. Realistically, it looks stunning and that's totally cool for this gun. But again, it took me years to start and actually really appreciate the fine art of less exotic wood. It's very easy to look at something that's loud and exciting and go, yeah, that's a great piece of wood. But to actually really appreciate the perfect piece is another thing altogether. And there you go. Not that interesting, but kind of interesting. Moving over from lot 1620 to lot 1658, the Giulio Bernardelli 410. This is a very different beast. That browning is not done on a 410 specific action, ergo it is quite deep. This Giulio Bernardelli is on a 410 specific action, and as you can see by comparison, it's squat. Squat's not a good describing word, is it? A much sweeter line. A much sweeter line indeed. That said, there's nothing wrong with the depth of this browning. It certainly allows for a bigger grip and a bigger forend. These are good things, certainly if you're not going to be shooting a 410 much, or if you're a big guy, you don't want a gun that's completely scaled down in every way. It may feel a little bit harder to get used to when coming from a bigger gun. But this gun, you can't argue that the lines of this action are stunning. Those who are into the guns will see a lot of similarities with another very popular and famous action. This gun is altogether more modern. It was made in 2014. It's got 30-inch barrels, although look at them. Where they're so low profile, they look way longer, with a solid mid and top rib. Generally, just on the barrel profile alone, look at the differences there. Again, this is a different kind of gun and a different kind of look. I can't help but just be endeared to the lines of this gun. And interestingly, although it looks quite slim and sleek, that grip is still very, very usable. It is a double trigger, however, and that is about the only downside to it from my perspective. It's not a huge downside, of course, it's just a slight difference. I do wonder whether that is just for reliability in this slim an action. Obviously, the smaller an action, the smaller the working parts, the harder it is to get things right. Certainly when it comes to single trigger units can be fussy at the best of times. When you're trying to super scale them down to the size of this, I mean, we take this barrel out of the action, you'll see quite how little stuff is inside of this. Things you have the safety catch, top lever spindle, all of this is inside of something the depth of my thumb. Maybe this was done from a customer choice perspective. Maybe this was a choice by Bernardelli to go, this is actually the more reliable option, given this is a small gauge gun with small everything. Double triggers is going to get it working to the best possible way. I don't know. Maybe it was because the customer wanted the ability to use different chokings, but it's only 1/4 and 1/2 choke, and the variance in choking on the 410 between 1/4 and 1/2 isn't going to be astronomical. Either way, I will never know unless I go and do more research, which I will do, which Holts always inspires me to do, which is why it's a great place to come, a great website to check out, because you can learn so much and see so many variants and new things. The wood is nice, beautiful lines, a very, very nicely put together thing. I love the grip, I love the checkering, I love it's a little bit coarser potentially than it could be. All around nice gun from a relatively underappreciated maker here in the UK. Final two things on this gun is that it's got a 15.5-inch stock, which is a really nice sales pitch in my head. There's a lot of things in the 410 world that have been made for youth and ladies shooters. You know, it's a lightweight gun, a lot of people start with it or progress with it. Obviously, increasingly, as I said right at the beginning, it is becoming more popular caliber with adult males. But the finding of quality second-hand guns with longer stocks is hard. Here is one. And secondly, look at the way this fore-end release button is recessed in. I think that is just lovely. But that is quality gun making, right? GB Giulio Bernardelli. Lovely. Engraving is like the #1 place where art is displayed on guns. You'll remember maybe 4 or 5 years ago we looked at the Moth gun, and go and check that video out if you've never seen it, for the most intricate woodwork carving on a stock you've ever seen that still looked like a stock. But I think you can get away with fairly simpler things, right? If you look at all the checkering on these guns, this is some by hand, some by machine, some by laser with circles on that old 682 Gold E. But you really can just have these nice subtle touches of class and finesse. If you have a little look at this here, if you look at this fore end here, you'll see in the checkering is a non-checkered patch with the little outline done with very intricate border detail. If anybody's ever worked with any checkering or wood or anything, you'll appreciate how hard it is to do this kind of thing without overrunning, chipping, having any issues whatsoever. I really appreciate the amount of effort this takes, but also how subtle it is. Part of the restoration process is whether the gun is actually worth it, right? And a lot of that boils down to the barrels.
It does, yeah.
every gun at Holts you can ask for wall thicknesses and bore sizes, and I would like you, as a professional cataloguer, to talk me through that process, how one of these works, and more importantly, one of those.
We measure the barrels of every gun that we sell because we are not legally allowed to sell a gun that is out of proof. Barrels can be out of proof for several reasons, but the bore gauge that we use to check the width of the diameter of the barrel, this is one of our analog ones. We use digital ones down to 4 decimal places in the gunroom.
Wow.
But I'm a little bit old school, so I stick with the old analog job. It does vary between calibers as to how many thousandths of an inch you can go before going out of proof. But essentially, the diameter has to correlate to the stamps on the flats of the barrels, which is what it would be marked at when it went through proof originally.
So this is stamped at 0.729 of an inch, nominal 12 gauge.
Yep.
You're allowed 10 thou over that with a 12 bore.
Correct.
Measure it up.
Okay, so first thing first, we would check the dial by setting our gauge first, and we set it to 729, which means going to just touch tightness, and then reset the dial to exactly 729. And we do the right barrel first, into a depth of 9 inches from the breech, and that's 733.
It's worth pointing out that it wouldn't potentially have been proofed at 0.729, but at the point this was made, they didn't have specific increments down to the thou, right?
Correct. So this is 737. So that's well in, yeah.
At the time, it would have been still on 10 thou increments, so
Yeah.
it wouldn't have been 739, which would have been the next one.
Yes,
Okay.
correct. So barrels are actually quite hard to shoot out when it comes to stripping the metal out from the inside.
No,
Because
next
obviously
to
lead
impossible.
is softer
Yeah.
than steel. Barrels get wider when they are lapped out to remove pits marks from the barrel. They get wider when you knock dents out and then lap out marks from that process as well. So it is the lapping process to get barrels back to gleaming order that makes them either go close to or over the limit of proof.
Relatively rare.
Yeah, but barrels can be out of proof for any other reason as well, and a number of other reasons as well. So if it is 65mm chamber, as this one is, and it has been reamed out to 70mm and not reproofed,
That is not.
that renders it out of proof.
Is it fair to say, if you chop it down, any modifications to the barrel need a reproof?
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Where
It's best to check with the proof house if you're in any doubt whatsoever. So check with
sure.
the proof master.
It's-
We always err on the side of caution.
Yeah, there's some fairly colossal fines involved.
Exactly. So we err on the side of caution. So
So
all
a
of the-
choke reproof.
so when you
So it's not the same as a full proof process.
it is stamped differently.
Okay.
So it is still got a charge there sent down it, but it is stamped R for choke reproof.
Okay.
Any number of issues can render a gun out of proof. If they are too heavily pitted, we will not sell the barrels as a going concern. Essentially, these rules are in place to keep the general public safe.
Yes.
The proof house came into existence because more soldiers were dying from their own firearms blowing up before the proof house was created by Royal Charter than were actually being killed by the enemy. So
It made sense to
Yes,
guarantee that every gun going out
the government
had
decided,
been tested
yes,
to a top
exactly.
level.
They
Yeah.
needed to find out that the barrels were worthy of the charge being put down it, and
Yeah.
that's why the proof house came into existence. We'll go on to talk about the wall thickness of a gun barrel as well. So, the tube of steel that holds the pressure charge that drives the shot out,
The barrel.
obviously, the barrel is obviously under quite a lot of stress as that process takes place. Talking of wall thickness, people are often surprised at just how little metal will take the charge going down a barrel. Auction houses, we recommend that our cut-off point is really 20 thou thick. Coke cans are usually between 4 and 5 thou thick.
Yeah, that's not a lot of coke cans.
So
right
it's,
there.
yeah, not a huge number.
But we have seen guns with brand new barrels, unaltered from the factory, proofed at what, 12 thou? I think that was the one we saw in here. It was crazy thin.
Yeah, that was an ultra lightweight barrel. Yes.
Yeah.
That is well below. Anything below 20, we will publish as wall thickness below recommended.
And you have to
minimum.
use it appropriately, I guess, right?
It's more to do with value than it is to do with safety.
Okay.
So
You think a new gun is 30 odd thou? 30,
yeah, so a new
35
over and
thou.
under between 30 and 35 thou. Your credit card is around about that as well. So it just gives you an indication of how little metal is there, even in high-performance steel proofed over and under barrels. The way we ascertain exactly how much steel is left in a barrel wall is with a wall thickness gauge like this. These are delicate instruments, so we pull back the probe off the upright and make sure it goes over. Then we pinch and just gradually let it down onto the brass ferrule at the bottom, and then we will go up and down the barrel
looking
at the dial, looking for a thin spot, because they're not uniform all the way through. So this is over 30 thou. So this is 31 thou is the lowest spot I can find, just under 31 thou. On a lot of them, they have a dial where you can lock it off and just hold it there, because sometimes your pressure, you can see me putting pressure on the upright is moving that by 10 thou. So you have to be careful with this, and then we carefully take it off without flicking it off and making this probe jump around too much. That is essentially how we measure a wall thickness.
Generally speaking, below 20 thou is below recommended.
Yeah.
Is there a set that you'd prefer, like 24 thou plus?
The thicker the barrel, obviously the greater the weight. And if you like fast handling guns, you'll probably want a thinner barrel. So you'll probably want between 20 and 25 thou for a fast handling gun. You can get fast handling barrels by having short barrels as well. Just takes the weight off, obviously. The other thing to talk about is when you're measuring a barrel for wall thickness with pits in it, you have to go to the bottom of the deepest pit to find out, because that is like the weakest link in the chain, the weakest part of the barrel. It is a delicate exercise, so especially with a pitted barrel, because you have to run it up and down the probe, and the probe will jump around.
We're going to sign off with these two, which are possibly the two nicest guns in the room.
That's quite a high accolade given some of the guns we've got in this room, but I'm inclined to agree with you.
Potentially the most intelligent purchase
They are
in the room.
Outstandingly good, and at 12 to 16,000 pounds, they are a bargain. So this is a pair of Joseph Brazier sidelock ejectors, engraved by Angelo Galeazzi.
We have had a look at some of Galeazzi's work already at the beginning of the video. It's the gun we opened with.
Yeah.
It's just outstanding.
It sets a different benchmark, and sadly he died in 2012, but the effects he was able to get in metal are like very few.
It's art. Like
it is.
It's just very complete work.
It is, and he pioneered the Burren style of engraving, and you can see some of his best work in this room for this auction. But I'm looking at images of Capercaillie in a Scottish landscape that are just breathtakingly good. He used light and dark. He was able to get those effects, the chiaroscuro effects, in metal. An outstanding artist would do with a pencil on a piece of paper. It's that good. It really is. It leaves you slightly lost for words. That's why I'm slightly stuttering over it, because, I mean, you can see the rib cage in this pointer. It's that good.
What I noticed on the first scan and on these, just the details down to the way the feathers flex on a wing beat, and the depth, the actual depth being able to be got just by a slight change in the way it's cut and differences in shading.
And he used that depth. He went light for softer subjects, and he went heavy for more emotive, deeper landscape style engraving. So he was just a master of what he did.
And I know it's silly, as I said earlier, to get all emotional over engraving, because it doesn't make a gun, but kind of does.
It does. I mean, this is functional art. This is obviously it's a shotgun designed to kill game.
As beautiful as they are, who was Joseph Brazier? What is a Joseph Brazier? It's not a name I'm particularly familiar with in new shotguns.
Brazier was one of the great lock makers of all time. In the Victorian era, he made outstanding hammer gun locks. This is a name that has been applied to an outstanding pair of guns, but it has little to do with Joseph Brazier himself, because obviously he's long since dead by the time these were made. These actions were built by David Dryhurst and Richard Tandy, although they didn't complete the finishing work, but they are beautifully made. Dryhurst was one of the outstanding gun makers of his generation. So, yeah, it's one of those retailed names that still exists in gun making.
But the quality of the gun,
but the quality is
real.
All there. It's all there.
I think the downside is if you bought them, you'd have to have them in a revolving cabinet.
Well, that's not a bad thing. Get to look at them every day.
Well, no, you just have to spend a load more money to be able to look at them every day, because you'd want to.
But they're worth properly enjoying, aren't they? I mean, the pintail there
is unbelievable. Stunning. To be fair, it's this could be some of my favourite engraving I've ever seen. Yeah, the way they're darting, diving.
And if you've observed snipe in flight, that is how they fly.
This is a moment, right? And I said earlier, it's a dedication to understanding the subject that is
through observation
super special.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah. Through proper observation of his subject. Snipe do that. They put the shoulders of the wing forward as they're coming in. J.C. Harrison, the great wildlife and game bird artist of his time, he did the same thing. He was able to observe birds in flight and get that down on paper. Galeazzi was able to do it in metal.
It's somehow more impressive.
It is. It is.
That's nice. That's like gorgeous poster material.
It is, yeah.
Thank you for watching, guys. This channel is made possible by our amazing sponsors. You can find out more about them in the description down below. And if you want to support the channel, you can join as a member. You get loads of extra content, well, some extra content, and occasionally we hook up and go clay shooting together as a membership group. If you don't feel like joining today, we really appreciate you watching and subscribing. Have a wonderful day.